I agreed to be someone's fake reference for a job interview, and now I'm their actual boss. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was organizing files in my cramped apartment. "Hey, this is Derek Lawson. You don't know me, but I got your number from a mutual friend. I'm applying for a marketing position and I need someone to vouch for my last job. I'll pay you $200 for 10 minutes of your time." I should have hung up immediately. Instead, I found myself asking questions. He explained that he'd been fired unfairly from his previous company, that HR was blacklisting him with bad references, that he had a family to feed and bills piling up. The desperation in his voice felt genuine. I'd been unemployed myself 6 months earlier, knew what it felt like to watch opportunities slip away because someone decided your past defined your future. "What do I need to say?" I asked, already compromising my principles. He sent me a detailed script, dates of employment, job responsibilities, performance metrics, reasons for leaving. It seemed harmless enough. One phone call, help someone get back on their feet, make some quick cash. I memorized the information and waited. The call from Whitmore Solutions came 3 days later. A crisp female voice introduced herself as Janet Hughes from Human Resources. "I'm calling to verify employment for Derek Lawson. He listed you as his supervisor at Brennan Marketing Group." I launched into the script, describing Derek as a dedicated account manager who consistently exceeded targets, maintained excellent client relationships, and left on good terms to pursue opportunities closer to his family. Janet asked specific questions about project management style, conflict resolution, and why we didn't fight harder to keep him. I improvised carefully, adding realistic details about budget constraints and organizational restructuring. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. She thanked me professionally and disconnected. I texted Derek that it was done. He sent the money through an app within the hour along with a message. "You literally saved my life. Thank you." I felt simultaneously guilty and weirdly proud. Then I forgot about it entirely. Just another strange transaction in a world where people do stranger things for money every day. 4 months later, my own career trajectory shifted dramatically. I'd been working as a senior marketing strategist at Bridgepoint Analytics, steadily climbing, but never quite breaking through to leadership. Then, our director of marketing operations, Gregory Mitchell, accepted a position at a competitor. The company launched an immediate search for his replacement. I applied internally, knowing my chances were slim. I'd only been with Bridgepoint for 18 months, and the role typically went to someone with 5 years minimum. But I'd spearheaded 3 major campaigns that quarter, bringing in revenue that exceeded projections by 40%. My interview with the executive team went exceptionally well. They asked about my vision for the department, how I'd handle expansion, what strategies I'd implement to improve cross-functional collaboration. I spoke confidently about integrated approaches, data-driven decision-making, and building team culture. 2 weeks later, they offered me the position. Director of Marketing Operations, significant salary increase, direct reports, real authority. I accepted immediately, barely believing my luck. My first day in the new role started with back-to-back meetings. HR scheduled orientation sessions covering policy updates, budget authority, hiring procedures, and performance management protocols. Then came the department introduction. I walked into the conference room at 9:30, ready to meet my team of 12 marketing professionals. They sat around the long table, some looking curious, others skeptical, a few openly hostile about being passed over for promotion. I scanned their faces while introducing myself, talking about my background and priorities. Then my eyes landed on someone in the back corner, and my throat went completely dry. Derek Lawson sat there with a coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, his expression shifting from polite attention to absolute horror. Our eyes locked for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. He went pale. I felt sweat break out across my back. Neither of us said anything, but the recognition was mutual and instantaneous. I stumbled through the rest of my introduction, barely coherent, then dismissed everyone to return to their regular work. Derek left quickly without making eye contact. I sat alone in my new office afterward, trying to process what had just happened. Derek worked here. Derek, the guy I'd lied for, the stranger I'd helped deceive his way into employment, was now my direct report. I pulled up the company directory and found his profile. Derek Lawson, marketing coordinator, hired 4 months ago, reporting structure placing him squarely under my supervision. The timeline matched perfectly with when I'd given that reference. Whitmore Solutions must be the company's former name or perhaps a subsidiary. Either way, the job he'd needed me to lie about getting was right here, in the department I now ran. The ethical implications crashed over me in waves. I'd helped someone commit fraud to get hired. Now I was responsible for evaluating his performance, determining his compensation, potentially deciding his future with the company. If anyone discovered what I'd done, both our careers would explode. I'd lose this promotion before I'd even started. Worse, I'd face termination and possible legal action for conspiring in employment fraud. Derek appeared at my door 20 minutes later. He knocked softly, his face still pale, hands shaking slightly. "Can we talk?" I nodded and closed the door. We stared at each other for a long moment before he spoke. "I had no idea you worked here. When they called for the reference, they said Whitmore Solutions. That was our parent company's name before the acquisition. I didn't know Bridgepoint had bought them out until after I started." His voice was quiet, almost pleading. I sat down heavily. "This is bad, Derek. This is really bad. He nodded frantically. I know. But please, you have to understand. Everything I told you was true. My previous company did screw me over with false accusations. I'm good at this job. Really good. Check my performance reviews. Ask anyone on the team. I've been killing it here. I wanted to believe him. Wanted this nightmare to have some redeeming quality. That doesn't change what we did, I said. We lied to get you hired. That's fraud. Only if anyone finds out, Derek said quickly. And why would they? You're the boss now. You have access to everything. We just keep our heads down, do good work, and nobody ever needs to know. I stared at him, recognizing the trap closing around us both. He was right in the most dangerous way possible. As director, I controlled access to personnel files, performance documentation, reference verification records. I could potentially bury this if I wanted to, but doing so would make me complicit in an ongoing deception, would compromise every decision I made regarding Derek's employment. I need time to think, I told him. He nodded, desperate gratitude in his eyes. Thank you. Seriously, thank you for not immediately throwing me under the bus. After he left, I sat staring at my computer screen, trying to figure out what the hell to do. Every option looked terrible. Coming clean meant destroying both our careers. Staying silent meant living with constant fear of discovery. There was no good choice, only degrees of catastrophe. I spent that first week observing Derek carefully while maintaining professional distance. What I saw surprised me. He wasn't lying about his competence. Derek handled his responsibilities with impressive skill, managing social media campaigns, coordinating with design teams, analyzing engagement metrics, and presenting findings with clarity and insight. Other team members respected him. He met deadlines consistently, volunteered for additional projects, and showed genuine enthusiasm for the work. In our team meetings, he contributed valuable ideas without grandstanding. His quarterly review, completed by the previous director 2 weeks before I arrived, rated him as exceeding expectations in every category. If I'd known nothing about how he got hired, I would have considered him one of my strongest team members. But I did know, and that knowledge poisoned everything. Every time I praised his work, I felt like a fraud. Every time I made decisions affecting the team, I wondered if I was unconsciously giving Derek preferential treatment to keep him quiet, or being too harsh to overcompensate. The situation got more complicated in week 2 when Janet Hughes from HR scheduled a meeting with me to discuss departmental hiring needs. We had 2 open positions from recent departures, and she wanted my input on candidate requirements and interview processes. I'll be handling the initial screenings and reference checks, she explained, pulling up forms on her laptop. Then you'll conduct the second-round interviews before we bring finalists to the executive team. She walked me through the verification process, and my stomach dropped as she described the exact protocols they followed. We've tightened our reference checking significantly over the past year, Janet said. We had some incidents where candidates provided fraudulent references. One guy even had his friend pose as a former supervisor. We caught it when we cross-referenced the phone number and found it belonged to a personal cell, not a company line. He was terminated during his probation period, and we reported him for employment fraud. She smiled, clearly proud of their enhanced vigilance. I managed to keep my expression neutral while panic flooded through me. How often does that happen? People using fake references? Janet shrugged. More than you'd think. Desperate people do desperate things. That's why we've implemented additional verification steps. We now call company main lines and ask to be transferred to the reference's direct extension. We verify employment dates with payroll departments. We check LinkedIn profiles to confirm job titles and timelines. It's more time-consuming, but it prevents fraud. She paused, looking at me curiously. You okay? You look a little pale. I forced a smile. Just tired. Long week adjusting to the new role. After she left, I immediately pulled Derek's hiring file from the secure HR database I now had access to. My hands trembled as I opened the documents. There it was, the reference check form from 4 months ago. Janet had called the number Derek provided, which went straight to my personal cell. She'd asked about Brennan Marketing Group, which I now realized was a completely fabricated company name. I searched for Brennan Marketing Group online. Nothing came up except some random small businesses with similar names in other states. Derek had invented the entire thing, and I'd corroborated his fiction without even knowing it. I checked the rest of his application materials. His resume listed 3 previous positions before Brennan Marketing, all with verifiable companies. Janet had confirmed those through standard channels, finding legitimate employment. Only the most recent position, the one he'd needed me to lie about, was fake. He'd created an elaborate cover story for a gap in his employment, or perhaps for getting fired from a job he couldn't use as a reference. Either way, the fraud was sophisticated and deliberate. I felt sick. This wasn't just some desperate guy who bent the truth. Derek had constructed an elaborate deception, complete with a fake company and a hired actor playing his supervisor. I'd been manipulated into participating in, something far worse than I'd realized. I called Derek into my office an hour later and closed the door. Brennan Marketing Group doesn't exist, I said, without preamble. His face went carefully blank. What are you talking about? I turned my monitor so he could see my search results. I looked it up. There's no such company. You made it up, didn't you? The whole story about being fired unfairly, about HR blacklisting you, all of it was bullshit. Derek was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. Okay, yes. Brennan marketing isn't real, but the rest was true. I did get fired unfairly from my actual previous job. I couldn't use them as a reference because my boss there was vindictive as hell. I needed something to fill that employment gap, so I created a cover story. I felt anger building. You lied to me. You manipulated me into committing fraud without even telling me the full truth. Derek's expression hardened. And you agreed to do it for $200 without asking too many questions. Don't pretend you're some innocent victim here. He was right, and that made me angrier. What was your plan, Derek? Just keep lying forever? Hope nobody ever looked too closely? He leaned back, something shifting in his demeanor. My plan was to do excellent work and prove I deserved to be here, regardless of how I got hired. And I have. Check my numbers. Look at the campaigns I've managed. I've contributed more to this department in 4 months than some people do in years. His confidence was unsettling. That doesn't justify fraud, I said. It doesn't erase what we did. Derek smiled slightly, and it wasn't a friendly expression. No, it doesn't. But here's the thing, boss. If I go down for this, you're coming with me. You think you can claim ignorance? You were the reference. You vouched for my employment at a fake company. HR will want to know why you didn't verify basic details before lying to them. Best case scenario, they fire us both. Worst case, they pursue legal action. The threat was implicit, but clear. Derek had leverage, and he knew it. We were bound together by mutual culpability, each holding the power to destroy the other. So what do you want? I asked quietly. He stood up, smoothing his shirt. I want to keep doing my job. I want fair treatment and normal career progression. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm a bomb about to explode and start evaluating me based on my actual performance. He paused at the door. We both made choices that got us here. Now we have to live with them. Unless you want to blow everything up, which I don't think you do. After he left, I sat in silence, feeling the walls close in. He was right again. I didn't want to blow everything up. I'd worked too hard to get here, had too much to lose. But staying silent meant being complicit, meant compromising my integrity daily, meant living under Derek's implicit threat indefinitely. Over the next month, I tried to maintain normalcy while internally screaming. I managed the department, made strategic decisions, led team meetings, and reported progress to executives. Derek performed his role competently, never stepping out of line, never drawing attention to our shared secret. But the dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. He no longer showed any deference to my authority. In meetings, he'd challenge my decisions subtly, positioning his objections as helpful suggestions, but with an undertone that communicated his power. Other team members noticed the tension. One of my senior coordinators, Lisa Crawford, pulled me aside after a particularly contentious meeting. Is everything okay with you and Derek? It feels like there's some history there. I assured her everything was fine, just normal creative differences, but the perception was spreading. People sensed the dysfunction even if they couldn't identify its source. My leadership was being undermined by the very person I was protecting. The situation escalated in week 6 when we had to fill one of the open marketing positions. I interviewed candidates and found an exceptional applicant named Karen Foster, a talented strategist with 8 years of experience and impressive portfolio work. She would be a significant asset to the team. During the hiring committee meeting, Derek raised concerns. I'm not sure she's the right cultural fit, he said, providing vague feedback about her interview responses. When I pressed for specifics, he deflected, focusing on minor issues that didn't warrant rejection. But he persisted, and his objections influenced other committee members. We ended up passing on Karen and continuing the search. Afterward, I confronted Derek privately. Why did you sabotage that hire? Karen was perfect for the role. He shrugged. I just didn't think she was right for the team. I felt my patience snap. This has to stop. You can't undermine my decisions every time you feel like flexing your leverage. Derek's expression went cold. I can do whatever I want, actually, because you need me more than I need you. If this comes out, you lose everything. The promotion, the salary, your reputation, probably your entire career in marketing. I lose a job I've had for 4 months. I'll bounce back. You won't. The calculation in his voice was chilling. This wasn't about mutual protection anymore. Derek was actively using our shared secret as a weapon, manipulating situations to assert control. You're blackmailing me, I said, the words feeling surreal. He smiled. That's a strong word. I prefer to think of it as maintaining balance. You have authority over me on paper, but I have information that gives me real power. We're actually equals, even if the org chart says otherwise. I realized then that I'd completely misread the situation from the beginning. Derek wasn't a desperate man I'd helped. He was a calculating manipulator who'd identified my weakness and exploited it perfectly. That night I couldn't sleep, replaying every interaction since I'd taken this position. Derek's performance, his initial horror at seeing me, his emotional plea, his gradual shift to confidence and then veiled threats, it all formed a pattern. He'd sized me up from the first moment, recognized that I had as much to lose as him, and systematically positioned himself to control the situation. I thought about going to HR, confessing everything, but the consequences paralyzed me. I'd lose the promotion I'd earned, face potential legal action, destroy my professional reputation in an industry where everyone knows everyone. My career would be over before it really began. but staying silent meant letting Derek manipulate me indefinitely, compromising my ability to lead effectively, living in constant fear of exposure. I lay awake until dawn, trying to find a solution that didn't end in disaster. By morning, I still hadn't found one. The harassment started subtly in week 8. Derek began arriving late to meetings, offering weak excuses that I couldn't challenge without seeming petty. He missed deadlines by a day or two, always with plausible justifications about unexpected complications or dependency issues with other team members. When I tried to address the pattern, he'd apologize with obvious insincerity and promise to do better. Then he started questioning my decisions in team meetings more aggressively, framing his objections as concern for the department but clearly designed to make me look indecisive or poorly informed. Other team members grew uncomfortable with the dynamic. Lisa approached me again. Derek's been acting really strange lately. He made some comments about how the previous director ran things better, how some people get promoted beyond their capability. It feels like he's trying to undermine you. I thanked her for the heads up while internally panicking. Derek was escalating, testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push before I broke. I scheduled a private meeting with him, determined to reestablish some control. Your behavior is becoming a problem, I said, keeping my voice steady. The tardiness, the missed deadlines, the challenging of decisions in public forums. It needs to stop. Derek leaned back in his chair, utterly relaxed. Or what? You'll write me up? Start a performance improvement plan? Go ahead. That creates documentation, paper trails, official records that HR might review closely if anyone ever questions my hiring. He paused, letting that sink in. Here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to continue being my boss, in name only. I'll do enough work to avoid official performance issues, but I'll also do whatever the hell I want. And you'll accept it, because the alternative is mutual destruction. Except I recover eventually, and you don't. I felt something inside me harden. You really think you have all the power here? He smiled. I know I do. You proved it by not going to HR immediately when you discovered who I was. That was a mistake, I said quietly. Derek laughed. Maybe, but you can't undo it now. Every day you stay silent makes you more complicit. Every decision you make regarding my employment while hiding our history deepens your involvement in the fraud. You had a chance to come clean on day one. That window closed months ago. Now you're just as guilty as I am, maybe more so, because you're the one with authority abusing your position to cover it up. His analysis was devastatingly accurate, and we both knew it. I'd trapped myself through hesitation and fear, and now Derek owned me. He stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and about that promotion you're probably thinking I want? I don't. I like my current role. Good work-life balance, decent pay, not too much responsibility. What I want is for you to leave me alone and let me coast. Think you can manage that, boss? After he left, I put my head in my hands, feeling completely defeated. Over the next 2 weeks, Derek's performance deteriorated further while remaining just barely acceptable enough to avoid formal intervention. He completed projects at the last possible moment, produced work that met minimum standards without excellence, and continued undermining my authority in subtle ways. The team's morale suffered. People sensed the dysfunction and started disengaging. My own performance reviews from executives reflected concern about departmental cohesion and leadership effectiveness. I was failing at the job I'd worked so hard to earn, paralyzed by the trap I'd built for myself. Then something unexpected happened. Another team member, Christopher Wells, came to my office looking uncomfortable. I need to tell you something about Derek, he said, closing the door. He approached me yesterday and asked if I'd be willing to provide a reference for him if he applied to other positions. He said he wanted to leave but was worried about getting a bad reference from here. My pulse quickened. What did you tell him? Christopher shifted uncomfortably. I said I'd think about it. But then he said something weird. He told me references don't really matter because companies don't check thoroughly. And even if they do, people can just have friends pretend to be supervisors. He laughed about it like it was no big deal. My blood went cold. He specifically said that? About having friends pretend? Christopher nodded. Yeah, he said he'd done it before and it worked perfectly. I thought it was a joke at first, but he was serious. It creeped me out, honestly. That's why I'm telling you. I thanked Christopher and asked him to keep the conversation confidential while I looked into it. After he left, I sat very still, processing this new information. Derek was not only holding our shared secret over me, he was apparently bragging about the fraud to other employees. The arrogance was staggering, but it also represented an opportunity, the first leverage I'd had since this nightmare began. I spent the next 3 days quietly, investigating without raising alarms. I reviewed Derek's work communications, looking for any documentation of his behavior or admissions of wrongdoing. I spoke casually with other team members, asking general questions about Derek's performance and conduct without revealing my purpose. What emerged was a picture of someone increasingly reckless and confident. Derek had made similar comments to at least 2 other colleagues about the meaninglessness of reference checks and the ease of gaming hiring systems. He hadn't explicitly admitted to fraud, but the pattern was unmistakable. He was getting sloppy, drunk on the power he held over me, convinced he was untouchable. I realized that Derek's greatest strength was also his fatal weakness. His leverage depended entirely on mutual assured destruction. But if he was already exposing himself through careless comments to colleagues, The destruction might not be mutual much longer. I started formulating a plan. I requested a meeting with Janet Hughes, framing it as a general discussion about hiring practices and reference verification procedures. I've been thinking about our processes, I told her. With the new positions we're filling, I want to make sure we're as thorough as possible in vetting candidates. Can you walk me through exactly how we verify references? Janet pulled up her protocols, explaining each step. I listened carefully, asking detailed questions about documentation, about what happens when discrepancies are discovered, about whether the company ever revisits reference checks for existing employees if new information surfaces. That's interesting, Janet said. We don't typically revisit old verification unless there's a specific reason to question the original check. Why do you ask? I chose my words carefully. I've heard some concerning comments from a team member about how easy it is to fake references. It made me wonder if our current employees might have slipped through cracks in our previous, less rigorous system. Janet's expression sharpened with interest. Which team member made these comments? I hesitated, then committed to the path I'd chosen. Derek Lawson. He's made multiple statements to colleagues suggesting that reference checks are meaningless and that people can easily have friends pose as former supervisors. He claims to have done it himself. Janet's face went serious. That's a significant allegation. Do you have documentation of these statements? I provided her with the names of the team members who'd heard Derek's comments, including Christopher. I haven't documented it formally yet because I wanted to consult with HR first, but multiple people have heard him say these things. Janet made notes, her professionalism not quite hiding her concern. I'll need to follow up on this. If there's any indication that Derek falsified information during his hiring process, we'll need to conduct a full investigation. I nodded, feeling the weight of what I was setting in motion. I understand. I just felt obligated to report it. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Janet interviewed Christopher and the other colleagues within 2 days. All of them confirmed Derek's comments about gaming reference checks. Janet then pulled Derek's complete hiring file and began reviewing every detail with fresh scrutiny. She called me 3 days later, her voice tight with controlled anger. We have a serious problem. I've been reviewing Derek Lawson's reference verification and something doesn't add up. The reference contact he provided for Brennan Marketing Group goes to a personal cell phone, not a business line. I called it this morning and it's disconnected now, but I traced the number through our records. I also searched for Brennan Marketing Group and found no legitimate business by that name registered in any state where Derek claimed to have worked. She paused. I need to ask you something directly. Did you know anything about this before the investigation started? I'd prepared for this question, had rehearsed my answer. No, I only became concerned when Derek started making those comments to team members. That's why I brought it to your attention. Janet was quiet for a moment. The thing is, the original reference check was conducted by me, and I distinctly remember speaking with someone who seemed very credible. But if the company doesn't exist and the phone number was personal, then whoever I spoke with was part of an elaborate fraud scheme. She sighed heavily. We're going to have to terminate Derek's employment immediately and report this to the authorities. Employment fraud is a serious crime, but I also need to figure out how this happened on my watch, how someone managed to deceive our verification process so thoroughly. I expressed appropriate shock and concern while my stomach churned with guilt and fear. I'd set these wheels in motion, knowing they would destroy Derek, but hoping desperately that they wouldn't circle back to destroy me. Do you need anything from me? I asked. Janet said she'd keep me informed as the investigation progressed and asked me to maintain confidentiality about the situation. Derek was called into HR the following morning. I watched from my office as he walked down the hallway, his usual confidence evident in his stride. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. When Derek emerged, his face was ashen, and security was escorting him directly to his desk to collect personal items before being removed from the building. He glanced toward my office as he passed, and our eyes met. The look he gave me was pure betrayal and rage, but also recognition. He knew I'd done this. He knew I'd found a way to eliminate the threat he posed, but he couldn't prove it, couldn't explain how I was involved without exposing his own fraud even more completely. Security walked him out. I watched through the window as they led him across the parking lot, to his car, handed him a box of his belongings, and waited while he drove away. He never looked back at the building. Janet called me that afternoon. Derek Lawson has been terminated for employment fraud. We've documented everything, and will be reporting it to the appropriate authorities. He initially tried to claim the reference was legitimate, but when we pointed out that Brennan Marketing Group doesn't exist and the phone number was a personal cell, he eventually admitted to fabricating the employment history. She sounded exhausted. This is a huge failure in our verification process. I'm implementing additional protocols immediately to prevent this from happening again. Multi-step verification, direct calls to company main lines, cross-referencing with state business registries. I expressed support for the enhanced procedures while privately calculating my exposure. Did Derek say anything about who helped him? The person who posed as his supervisor? Janet sighed. He claims he paid some guy he met online, someone he never met in person and whose real name he doesn't know. Paid through a Cash App that's since been deleted. It's possible, but it also sounds like bullshit to cover for an accomplice. Are you going to investigate that further? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. We're turning everything over to the police, Janet said. They'll decide whether to pursue fraud charges. Honestly, I don't know how far they'll dig. These cases are often hard to prosecute unless there's significant financial damage to the company. But Derek's career in marketing is over. No reputable company will touch him after this becomes public. After we hung up, I sat in my office feeling a complex mixture of relief, guilt, and lingering fear. I'd eliminated Derek, had removed the immediate threat to my position and career. But I'd done so by betraying someone I'd initially tried to help, by weaponizing information I was equally guilty of participating in. The fact that Derek had turned manipulative and threatening didn't entirely erase my own culpability. I'd lied to get him hired, had committed fraud for money, and then covered it up for months. That I'd eventually exposed him didn't make me innocent. It made me a survivor, which is different. The department stabilized over the following weeks. I filled Derek's position with a qualified candidate who passed rigorous reference verification. Team morale improved noticeably without the tension Derek had created. My own performance reviews became more positive as I focused on leadership without the constant distraction of managing a blackmail situation. Executives praised my handling of the fraud discovery, commending me for alerting HR to suspicious comments and maintaining professionalism throughout the investigation. I accepted their praise while internally cringing. 3 months after Derek's termination, I received a call from a detective. I'm investigating the employment fraud case involving Derek Lawson. I have some follow-up questions about the reference verification process. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice steady. Of course, happy to help however I can. The detective asked about departmental procedures, about when I first became aware of concerns about Derek's hiring, about whether I'd had any previous contact with Derek before he joined the company. No previous contact, I said, the lie coming smoothly after months of practice. I didn't know him before I took over as director. The first I heard about any issues was when team members reported his concerning comments about faking references. The detective asked a few more routine questions, thanked me for my time, and ended the call. I sat shaking afterward, realizing how close I'd come to exposure. If the detective had dug deeper, had traced the phone records more thoroughly, had questioned why I seemed so knowledgeable about reference verification procedures during my conversation with Janet, any number of threads could have unraveled everything. But apparently, the investigation was concluding without pursuing the accomplice angle aggressively. Derek had maintained his story about an anonymous online contact, and without evidence to contradict that, the police were likely to close the case with Derek as the sole perpetrator. I'd gotten away with it, not through cleverness but through luck, and Derek's decision to protect his anonymous accomplice, probably hoping for leniency or simply having no other story to tell. 6 months after Derek's termination, I'd settled fully into the director role. The department was thriving, I'd implemented new strategies that drove impressive results, and my reputation within the company was strong. I'd successfully buried the evidence of my involvement in Derek's fraud, had eliminated the threat he posed, and had emerged with my career intact and advancing. But late at night, I sometimes thought about that first phone call, about the choice I made for $200. I thought about how easily I'd compromised my principles, how quickly I'd justified lying to help a stranger, how naturally the deception had flowed once I'd committed to it. I thought about Derek too, wherever he was now, probably struggling to rebuild a career destroyed by his own schemes and my calculated betrayal. I'd convinced myself that exposing him was necessary self-preservation, that he'd become a threat I had to eliminate, and that was true. But it was also true that I'd helped create the situation, had participated willingly in fraud, and had only sought justice when it became convenient for me. One evening, 7 months after the whole situation had ended, I got a LinkedIn message from an account with no profile picture and a generic name. "You think you won, but you just proved you're exactly what I always suspected. A coward who sells his integrity cheap and then destroys people to cover his tracks. I lost a job. You lost something much more important. Sleep well." The account was deleted before I could respond. It might have been Derek, might have been someone else entirely, might have been my own guilt manifesting as phantom accusations, but the message crystallized something I'd been avoiding acknowledging. I had lost something important through this entire ordeal, not just innocence or moral high ground. Those were gone the moment I agreed to lie for money. I'd lost the ability to trust my own judgment, to believe in my own ethics, to feel secure in the choices I made. Every success in my career now carried the shadow of how I'd protected it. Every leadership decision was tainted by the memory of manipulation and betrayal I was capable of under pressure. I kept advancing, kept succeeding, kept building a career that looked impressive on paper. But internally, I carried the knowledge that I'd crossed lines I could never uncross, that I'd committed fraud and then committed worse acts to cover it up, that I'd destroyed someone partly out of necessity, but mostly out of self-preservation. The fake reference I'd agreed to provide had seemed like a simple transaction at the time. 10 minutes on the phone, $200, help someone in need. I hadn't understood that I was entangling myself in a web of deception that would require increasingly desperate measures to escape. I hadn't realized that the easy compromise would lead to months of manipulation, blackmail, and eventually calculated destruction of another person's career. I hadn't known that saying yes to that first request would fundamentally change who I was and what I was capable of doing to protect myself. A year after becoming director, The company promoted me again, Senior Director of Marketing Operations, overseeing multiple departments, significant influence in strategic planning. I accepted the promotion with appropriate gratitude and excitement. Everyone saw me as a rising star, someone who'd proven leadership capability and earned advancement. Only I knew the truth about the foundation that success was built on. Only I understood that my career trajectory was secured through fraud, cover-up, and betrayal. I think about Derek's final message sometimes, about his accusation that I'd lost something more important than he had. He was right. I'd lost the version of myself that believed I was fundamentally honest, that thought I'd never compromise core principles, that assumed I'd choose integrity over advancement when tested. That person was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly how easy it is to justify doing terrible things when your career and reputation are at stake. And the worst part, the thing that haunted me most, was knowing that if faced with the same situation again, I'd probably make the same choices. Because the alternative was losing everything I'd worked for, and I'd proven conclusively that I valued my career more than I valued being someone I could respect. That knowledge sat heavy in my chest as I took my new office and prepared for another round of congratulations and celebration. The police eventually closed Derek's case without filing charges. Apparently, the cost of prosecution outweighed the damages to the company, and Derek had already faced consequences through termination and professional blacklisting. Janet mentioned it casually during a quarterly review meeting, noting that the enhanced verification protocols implemented after the incident had prevented 2 subsequent fraud attempts by other candidates. The system had been improved, the vulnerability addressed, and the company had moved on. Everyone had moved on, except me. I still checked that anonymous LinkedIn account periodically, but it never reappeared. I searched Derek's name occasionally, finding no trace of him in the marketing industry. He'd either left the field entirely or changed locations and was rebuilding somewhere no one knew his history. I hoped, in whatever capacity I was still capable of hoping for his well-being, that he'd found some kind of stability, that he'd learned something from the experience beyond confirming that systems can be gamed and people can be manipulated. But I didn't really believe that. People generally don't change, don't learn profound lessons, don't transform into better versions of themselves through consequence alone. I thought about my own lack of transformation. I'd learned operational lessons about covering tracks, about eliminating threats efficiently, about weaponizing bureaucratic processes to achieve personal objectives. But I hadn't learned moral lessons. I hadn't emerged from the experience more ethical or more committed to integrity. I'd emerged more calculating, more ruthless, more willing to do whatever was necessary to protect my interests. That realization should have bothered me more than it did, which was perhaps the most concerning thing of all. I'd become someone capable of profound compartmentalization, able to function successfully in professional and social contexts while carrying substantial guilt and shame about actions I'd never acknowledged publicly. The cognitive dissonance should have been unbearable, but instead, it became manageable, then normal, then barely noticeable. That psychological adaptation was probably the real loss Derek had referenced. Not just specific ethical violations, but the fundamental change in character that allowed me to commit those violations and then continue functioning without collapse. 2 years after the whole situation, I attended an industry conference in another city. During the networking reception, I saw Derek across the room. He looked thinner, older, wearing a badge identifying him as a freelance consultant rather than affiliated with any specific company. Our eyes met across the crowded space. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd before I could decide whether I wanted to approach him or avoid him. I spent the rest of the reception distracted, wondering if I should try to find him, if there was anything to say that would matter. But ultimately, I did nothing. There was no conversation that could undo what happened, no words that could restore what we'd both lost through our mutual deception and betrayal. The past was fixed, and we both had to live with it in whatever way allowed us to continue functioning. I returned to my hotel room that night feeling exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the conference schedule. I stayed in that senior director position for another year before being recruited by a larger company for an executive role. The move required extensive background checks and reference verification. I provided all the necessary information with complete confidence, knowing my record with Bridgepoint was impeccable. Nobody questioned my integrity or competence. Nobody knew about the fraud that had defined a crucial period of my career. I accepted the new position and relocated, leaving behind the city where Derek had entered my life and changed my understanding of who I was capable of being. The fresh start felt simultaneously like liberation and like running from something I could never truly escape, because the problem wasn't geographic. The problem was internal, permanent, unresolved. I'd crossed lines and covered tracks and betrayed someone partly out of necessity and partly out of calculated self-interest. Those actions would always be part of my history, whether anyone else knew about them or not. In quiet moments, usually late at night when sleep wouldn't come, I'd think about that Wednesday afternoon phone call. I'd replay the conversation, imagine saying no, imagine taking the harder ethical path. In those imaginings, I refused Derek's request, didn't compromise my principles for quick money, avoided the entire catastrophic sequence that followed. But then I'd remember how desperate his voice sounded, how much I'd related to that desperation from my own recent unemployment. I'd remember genuinely wanting to help someone in a difficult situation, believing I was doing something decent even if it wasn't entirely legal. The road to becoming someone I didn't entirely recognize had been paved with small compromises and understandable justifications. That was the real lesson, the one I'd actually learned through the experience. Evil isn't usually a dramatic choice between clear right and wrong. It's a series of small decisions that each seem defensible in isolation, but accumulate into something monstrous when viewed collectively. 3 years after that initial phone call, I was established in my executive role, managing significant teams, influencing major strategic decisions, earning substantial compensation. My career had surpassed what I'd imagined when I first entered the marketing field. I'd achieved the success I'd worked toward for years, had proven my capability and worth repeatedly. But the foundation of that success included fraud, deception, cover-up, and betrayal. I'd built my career partially on lies, and that knowledge was something I'd carry forever. Some nights I convinced myself the ends justified the means, that one ethical lapse didn't negate years of legitimate hard work, that everyone compromises sometimes in pursuit of advancement. Other nights, I knew I was just another person who'd discovered they valued success more than integrity when actually tested. Derek's accusation echoed through those darker moments. I'd lost something more important than a job. I'd lost the person I thought I was before that phone call. I never heard from Derek again after that conference sighting. His digital footprint remained minimal, suggesting he'd either left the industry permanently or was working under a different professional identity. I sometimes wondered if he thought about me as often as I thought about him, if our strange, intertwined history haunted him the way it haunted me. Probably not. Derek had always been more pragmatic, more willing to treat relationships as transactional, more comfortable with deception as a tool. I'd thought I was different, thought I had stronger principles, thought I'd never compromise the way I ultimately did. That delusion had been stripped away through our mutual destruction. Now I knew exactly who I was, someone capable of profound ethical compromise when sufficiently motivated by fear and self-interest. That self-knowledge was valuable in its way, but it came at a cost. The comfortable self-image I'd maintained for years was gone, replaced by a more accurate but far less flattering understanding of my character. I lived with that understanding every day, in every professional triumph and personal quiet moment. I'd agreed to be someone's fake reference for $200 and discovered I was willing to do much worse things when my career was threatened. That discovery changed everything, even though from the outside, my life looked like nothing but success. The executive role brought new challenges and responsibilities, but none ever quite matched the intensity of that period managing Derek while hiding our shared secret. I became skilled at compartmentalization, at maintaining professional effectiveness while carrying substantial internal conflict. I mentored junior employees, advocated for ethical business practices in meetings, and built a reputation as a leader with strong principles. The irony wasn't lost on me. Though I never acknowledged it publicly, I'd become an expert at projecting integrity while knowing my own compromises intimately. That duality defined my career in ways no one around me understood. Success and fraud intertwined so completely that I couldn't separate them anymore, couldn't identify where legitimate achievement ended and ill-gotten advancement began. Maybe that was the real punishment for what I'd done, not exposure or consequences, but the knowledge that every achievement was, tainted by the lies I'd told and the betrayal I'd committed to protect them. I carried that burden silently, successfully, for years, building a career that looked impressive from every angle, except the internal one only I could see. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.